Hello, everyone. Welcome to In Session. My name is Kristen, aka Like Water. This is In Session teaching artists how to make an impact and generate income. So, we're going to cover the power that lies within the artist community to inspire and support young learners while generating income. Today, I am joined by Evelyn Brandes, Randy Mason, and Cherie Rowe. I'm super excited. Let's start with you, Evelyn. Could you just let the audience know a bit about who you are, your preferred gender pronouns, and a bit about what you do?
Hi, yes, my name is Evelyn Brandes, and I'm a violinist and a teaching artist. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I've been a teaching artist in New York City for the past 6 years. I've also worked as a teaching artist and a performer for around 9 years at this point. I kind of got my start in Baltimore, where I was at school at Peabody Institute, and my first introduction to teaching artistry was this crazy thing called a collective composition workshop, where I went into Baltimore City Public Schools and worked with probably around 100 students, grades K through 12, in different schools, writing music together with a team of other artists and teaching artists. And it absolutely blew my mind. So that's kind of how I got started being a teacher as well as a performer. In New York, I currently work with the Bronx Arts Ensemble, as well as Leadlights Ensemble, which I helped found. We're a small ensemble that is based in Washington Heights, and we're about making music in the community, connecting to the community, bringing joy and vitality. And I also work with the Elizabeth Fadley Violin Studio. So those are kind of my teaching things here in the city. And I've just done a whole lot of teaching artistry for lots of organizations around New York ever since I moved here. I'm really passionate about music for social change, which is kind of the Sistema music education movement. And I co-founded a program in Tennessee for underprivileged kids called East Lake Expression Engine, working to give them opportunities in music education.
Awesome. That's incredible. I'm in Baltimore, so I truly love what you're doing. That is incredible. Don't worry, everybody. We'll be connecting you all with these incredible panelists. So if you missed some of the things that Evelyn has said, we will share it with you for sure. Thank you, Evelyn. Randy, can you tell us a bit about who you are and your preferred gender pronouns as well?
Yes. Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Randy Mason, and I am a father, I am a husband, and I am a hip hop artist and a teaching artist. So I teach the art of emceeing, founded a program here in the Bronx called R.H.Y.M.E, which stands for Rhymes Help Young Minds Excel. And I work at an organization called Thrive Collective. We're a nonprofit arts organization that creates hope and opportunity in and around New York City public schools through the arts and mentoring. And so we work with young people all throughout the city, schools and community-based organizations to facilitate project-based learning around murals, music production, songwriting, media, mentoring, all that fun stuff. And I guess, in terms of how I got started growing up, I was always in love with hip hop and writing rhymes and breaking and writing graffiti and all these things. And I would get in trouble all of the time at school for doing these things. So there wasn't, at least in the schools where I attended, there wasn't really a space for it. Literally, kicked out of class for writing rhymes and breaking in the hallway and doing graffiti. And so, years later, I end up falling in love with an amazing teacher. And so she and we get married. And what happens when a rapper marries a teacher, they give birth to an educational hip hop program. And so that was kind of the beginning of how I got into art education. And so that's probably been around 5 or 6 years or so in New York City as well. And I'm excited to be here with you guys. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. That is incredible. I love that journey. Absolutely. And thank you for being here for sure. And last but not least, Cherie, can you share as well with the audience a bit about who you are and your preferred gender pronouns?
Yeah, hi, I'm Cherie. I'm her and she, her. I'm also a wife and a mom of an 8-year-old. And I love what you had to say, Randy, because you and I are like from opposite worlds, and I think that's amazing. I am a farm girl. I grew up in the Midwest in a town of 3,000 on the farm. But the same principles kind of apply, where when you grow up in that, there's this sense of boredom and there isn't things to do, and some of the challenges with that. And you still have some of the issues of exposure, or I should say lack of exposure to experiences. And I grew up an hour away from Cleveland, where there was all this arts and culture, and I didn't know any of it existed until I was much, much older. So it's interesting to see how these two worlds may be very different, but very similar issues, especially for young people. So I've been here in this city for 6 years now. Can't believe it, it's been that long. And I am currently, thanks to the pandemic, have been really working hard to, obviously, like all of us, change what we're doing. And I am almost there, and coming October 2021, a new program called the Whole Musician Blueprint for young artists, right? They go into lessons, everything is all about correct notes, which of course there's nothing wrong with that, but there's so much more to being an artist than just the notes on the page. So this is a program to just help students and young artists embrace all of the artistry there is to music beyond just the page. And so I'm really excited to unveil that in about 3 weeks' time. So that's an incredible thing that has come out of the pandemic that I probably never would have been pushed to do. But when you're sitting at home going, what do I do with my time? And this was birthed out of it. Before that, I actually was a music director at Virginia Opera. I've been in 6 states, all over, as a teaching artist, as an artist, right? It's common to travel and be all over. And I had the privilege there of running a program for kids and introducing them to opera. And I remember taking on this role, and I thought, is this really gonna work? Our 5-year-olds, our 8-year-olds, like, are we really doing this? And I learned, that was one of the places I learned that, yeah, like this young learning, it really works. And to see these kids, when they were exposed, when they were introduced, they were ecstatic. And Virginia Opera then became known as this place where the audience ages were as diverse as anywhere. It was so common on a Friday night for there to be 10-year-olds in the audience and 80-year-olds in the audience. And I'm so proud that I got to be a part of that and see that really, when you do take the time to introduce kids to something that everyone swears they're gonna hate, it's not necessarily true. So that's just a little bit of my life journey. But I've been a teacher and an artist professionally for 21 years now. I hate to say that out loud, but yeah. So that's me.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Super excited about that. I myself am a classically trained vocalist. So I'm so excited that you're exposing young people to opera, because it is fun. And we do assume that young people won't like it, but you never know until they try it. So super excited for that. So I mean, I don't know if you guys are excited, but I'm excited for this incredible powerhouse panel that just shared just a little bit about who they are and what they do. So we're going to be covering several topics related to the art of teaching for the first 45 minutes of our discussion. And then we're going to leave some time at the end for open Q&A. So if you guys have any questions while we're going through the conversation, feel free to drop it in the Q&A and not in the chat, so it doesn't get lost in the sauce. So before we jump into it, just a few Zoom housekeeping rules or items to cover. First is, this is a supportive and uplifting space, so we want to keep that in mind as we're jumping into the dialogue and as we're in the chat as well. Also, please use the chat. Go ahead and jump in there. Let us know where you're tuning in from, what you're excited to hear about. And also, you can use the chat to just share some love with one another, with the panelists, but be sure to change that blue little box in the chat from host and panelists to everyone, so that we can all join in on the conversation there. Also, like I said, if you have any questions during the chat, there is a Q&A function within Zoom. Go ahead and click that, and you can drop any questions that you have throughout our conversation, and we'll try our very best to get to the questions at the end. And then you'll also be receiving a survey at the end just to let us know how you enjoyed the webinar and if you have any topics that you'd like us for us to cover in our next webinar. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into it, and we're going to start. And here's the first question. So, how can an artist begin teaching their craft? Let's jump right in with you, Randy. What is your advice for how an artist should begin or could begin teaching their craft?
That's a great question. I think I was thinking about it earlier when I was reading through the questions, and something that's important for me as a teaching artist and just as an artist and as a student is sharing with people not only the passion but the process. So a lot of times, especially in art, we get to see artists expressing their passion, which is great. It's wonderful. But it's not as often that we get to learn about the actual process and the step-by-step, the process that it took to get to that point. And so for me, it's like, what makes me come alive? What am I most passionate about in terms of art and as an MC? And then sharing that with young people and sharing the process of how I actually got to that point. So how you go from an idea to a concept to writing something in your phone or on a book and turning that into an actual verse or song, into a stage performance or whatever it may be. So I think passion and process, for me, that's kind of where it begins in terms of how do I present this craft in an informative teaching context.
That sounds incredible, and that makes it so much more relatable and like attainable, at least for me, because you're like, how do I even start? And you're like, start with what you do. It sounds so simple, but no, I didn't think about that. So I appreciate that for sure.
Absolutely.
I was going to jump in with, when I was looking at this question, it occurred to me, part of why I teach is to help people discover transferable skills. So as a violinist, I have to practice and I have to have kind of a certain type of discipline, a certain type of grit, as well as learning how to communicate with other people when I play in groups with people. And there's so many things about what you do as an artist that you might not think would be valuable to someone else. But if you start brainstorming what is useful to people about what I do, you can probably discover a lot more than you think. And then bringing someone like Randy said through that process will help them to break it down and see, oh, hey, if I work on practicing my instrument, that also gives me the resiliency and the diligence to create a schedule and do something consistently over the week or different things like that, which is not something I would have immediately thought about. But as I have become passionate about Sistema that I mentioned about music for social change, it's all about just developing things like social skills and creativity and so on in kids. And it's just crazy what a big difference that makes in their whole life and not just in the art that they make.
I love that. Absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Sheree.
Yeah, Randy mentioned passion, and I want to piggyback with that, the idea of generosity. And I think that as artists and as teaching artists, we want to make sure that we're asking ourselves the question with maybe what we're considering teaching and bringing forth into the world is, how can I be generous? And I want to clarify, I don't mean free. Okay, right? Artists, we're asked to be free all the time. We can't pay rent on free, but right, generous in what we share and what we give to the world. And I think if we're asking ourselves, if we're looking inside and going, okay, these are my gifts, this is my art, how can I transfer that as an artist who is doing to, this is what I do and this is what I give. So for me, it's that concept of generosity, which allows me to figure out what to be showing the world. And with that comes the passion, right? And I think people see the passion out of the generosity. And I think then they're attracted to that, right? And, you know, look, I know we all want to be YouTube sensations or what, you know, whatever, maybe not, I should say that, but right. We want everything to go quickly. We want the process to be quick, and it's never quick. Nobody's overnight. But if they see the generosity, they are attracted to it. And then you go from one person that wants to work with you to two, and then so on. And it literally spreads through that passion and that generosity.
I love that. Dropping gems in here, y'all. And this is just question one. So this is so exciting. So do you all feel like, or in your experience, do artists need to create their own learning program in order to like shop their teaching to schools and to other entities?
I'll jump in. I don't think so necessarily. I think that you can, and I think there is a benefit of creating something kind of from scratch, right? What's really from scratch? Nothing, but you know, from scratch, there is a benefit to that, especially because you have this ownership and you're able to kind of facilitate or teach it in the way that you have in mind. But what I find even more beneficial is learning from other practitioners, like what are they doing? How are they doing it? And then adopting and adapting. So like I'll adopt certain, you know, methods and ideas, and then I'll adapt it and make it my own, which is essentially hip hop, right? Remixing everything, right? Remixing jazz records, blues records, taking ideas and flipping them, taking words that, you know, meant this, but now they mean this because of the way we use it in our language. And so with teaching, I think the same philosophy applies. So you don't necessarily have to start creating your own curriculum. I think eventually you'll probably want to build toward that. Depending on what your aspirations are. Like for me, example, you know, my wife is an educator, she's a teacher, so she's excellent at helping me bring these grand ideas into a lesson plan or into a curriculum, into a language that an administrator or a principal can understand, as opposed to me just like, yo, kicking rhymes and like, this is what I have in mind, it's going to be impactful, trust me. She helps me to really organize that. So yeah, I think there's a benefit to creating your own curriculums and everything like that, by way of learning, adapting, and making it your own.
Love that. And shout out to your wife. You know, we all need that other person, you know. It's a team effort for sure. Cherie, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in there, as you know, I mentioned at the beginning about launching a program in 3 weeks. And I just wholeheartedly agree with Randy. Listen, I said I've been doing this for 21 years, and I am finally, right? I'm finally putting a program out there that is technically my own. Although, as Randy says, it's not really my own, right? It's the experiences, it's the journey over the last 20 years, what I've learned from everybody that's come before me that is getting packaged, right? It's just getting packaged differently. But I wholly agree. There is no rush at all. I've done fine for 20 years without it. And this is just the next natural step, I think, but definitely not a need, I think, for a long time.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I would say I've done both. I've done both simultaneously, and it's far easier just jumping into something that already exists. And there's actually a lot out there. So for those of you who haven't done a lot of teaching artist work and are kind of looking to break into it and don't know where to start, a lot of times the best place is networking, professional development kind of events around teaching artistry, which especially right now, there's tons online for free. And that kind of gives you an idea. Like in New York, I've worked with the Center for Arts Education, this another place called LEAP NYC. They do learning through expanded arts programs to public schools. And all of those places have had their own professional development as well. So like when I got hired, I got to learn through their organization. So I feel like what the other two were saying, I picked up a lot of the things that I know about teaching artistry, not from school, but just from development and networking and working within organizations that had a framework for it.
Awesome. And that kind of takes me right into the next question. Similarly with, you know, partnering with an entity that already has a program going on, are there any certifications that artists need in order to either go at this alone or to join an organization that is already teaching in schools or in other places?
I can just speak to that, at least here in New York and also in the US in general. The biggest thing is you just have to go through a background check process and fingerprinting and all that kind of thing, just like a very practical step. And then also it depends on your discipline, I think. For example, in music, in violin, there is such a thing as Suzuki certification. So if you're a string teacher, the Suzuki is a type of method that you can get trained in and get a certificate. However, I have not been Suzuki certified, and I've been teaching privately and in group lessons for, like I said, almost 10 years. So that's more of a choice, and I think it's very discipline specific.
Yeah.
Did you have something you wanted to share? Oh yeah, I saw you go off mute.
I agree that it is a choice. There are pros, obviously, to getting certified in different skills and methods, but not always necessary. But specific to New York City, like especially working within the DOE, the Department of Education, you're probably going to need to become a DOE vendor, right? So that's something I didn't know when I first started, and so I was going to schools and kind of pitching and shopping this program, and they were like, "Oh, are you a DOE vendor?" I'm like, "What is that?" Right? And so I had to figure that out, figure out how to do that. It's fairly simple. Got that done. You don't necessarily have to do that either as an independent teaching artist. You could partner with an organization who is a DOE vendor. For example, I work at Thrive Collective. They are a DOE vendor, and therefore I use that information when I provide, programs at schools. So those are options. Do you want to get your own vendor number, start your own kind of LLC, or partner with an organization that's already doing it and has that already in place? And then in terms of, just going back to the certification, my experience, like I kind of alluded to earlier, I wasn't the greatest student in school. And, I was very much consumed by the arts, but not exactly in the settings in which school was presenting the arts, if that makes sense, right? So I was, where emceeing was celebrated, where b-boying was celebrated, where graffiti was celebrated, where DJing was celebrated, was definitely not in academia, at least in my experience and where I was at in the Bronx at that particular time. And so where I found my education was literally in some dangerous places, right? And emceeing and spending hours and hours writing and rhyming and performing and doing open mics and all that sort of thing. I might be going off subject a little bit, but that was my educational kind of, that was my training. That was my certification. And interestingly enough, man, you could be degreed up. You can have 1 million degrees and not be good at your craft, right? And you can have 0 degrees and be excellent at it. So then it goes back to the first question where we talked about passion, generosity, and transferable principles. When you apply those 3 things, your passion, and what makes you come alive, and you are able to communicate and express that and via generosity, and then tie into that transferable skills, as Evelyn mentioned earlier, that's huge for me. Like one of the taglines I like to use is bridging mic skills and life skills, right? And so it's like, how does this apply to your life outside of hip hop, outside of music, outside of art? And there are plenty of things that we can glean from our crafts and apply. So, and I always tell young people, like, I'm not teaching you to become like a rapper. If that's not what you want to do, no doubt. But via this project-based learning, you're hopefully going to glean something that's going to benefit your life in another area. So yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Oh, Sheree?
Yeah, no, I noticed a question here in the chat related to this, a practical question. And he asks that he's always wanted to do a workshop about songwriting, but doesn't know how to start. And I think, what you've heard Randy and Evelyn say is just start, right? This is clearly something that you are passionate about. And I would say start local. It's so easy in this global economy to think that we need to think big? Need to think international. Should I do, a YouTube channel for? Think local. You say you're in Uganda, start right where you are with the people that are around you. If you've ever heard the idea of what's called the smallest viable audience, and this is the idea of how you get people to buy in to what you're selling, right? And you're selling something at the end of the day, right? You're selling art. And this is why you want to stay local. You want that small audience, small and focused. That's the way to start. And then from a practical standpoint, I know you asked about the platforms one could join for teaching artistry. Obviously, as mentioned, YouTube, record yourself teaching a workshop. And if anything, it helps you see how you're doing, what things are looking like. And the more you do something, the better you'll get at it. And as far as actual course, if you're talking about literal course platforms, there is software. Like I'm using LearnDash, if you've heard of LearnDash. There's Teachable, there's Kajabi. So those are literal software platforms where you can create your workshop, you can create your webinar. But on a practical beginner level, instead of getting mired in software, literally start in your community where you are and just people and say, hey, have you ever been interested in this? And do it for free for a little while. And then you can generate something from that.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you for grabbing that out of the chat for sure. And thank you for dropping that question as well. Again, if you all have any questions throughout this, please put it in the Q&A so that we can grab that and address all the questions that you all have. So as you're talking about platforms and how to get started, how can artists get funding to begin their program or to begin teaching? Any advice on that? Let's start with you, Evelyn.
Sure. In my experience, I started early on with grants. There's a lot of different places that offer grant opportunities, especially in the US. I'm not sure if I can speak internationally as much, but in the US, it tends to be there's opportunities at your city level. So like New York City has a lot of different organizations that create their own grant funding, which basically means you just have to apply, put some information about the program or teaching artistry that you want to be doing through the grant. Usually includes information about the community you're going to serve, about what is your goal, about how many people you'll reach, and some of the logistical things like dates, times, etc. And then they will decide, there are different panels that decide who gets this funding. And there's also a lot of ways to get help writing grants, whether it's freelance people who will help you actually write your grant proposals, or whether it's just networking with friends who have done that kind of thing before. But yeah, city and state are great places to start. Also, there's like arts organizations nationally and internationally that give kind of seed grants for, like, if you're starting a project. There's a lot of things for very specific ideas, like if you have never gotten a grant before and you want to found something, there's a lot of opportunities out there for that. There's if you are a ongoing arts education after school program in a specific area. So I think my advice is to start with just looking at what are the organizations, whether it's arts organizations, or like, does your city or your state or country, depending on where you live, have some kind of national or statewide or local grant program.
Awesome. Love that. Randy, oh, Sheree.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to speak to the opposite end of that for those of you who are not thinking about maybe doing your program as a nonprofit. Obviously, when I worked at Virginia, it was nonprofit work that we were doing, but what I'm doing is for profit. And I hope it's okay if I do a shout out to to something that I've used. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, I wasn't sure if there were any rules I was breaking with that. But I have taken what some people call the bootstrapper method, right? And that's simply, and I think a lot of us can relate to that, it's simply starting with what we have. I have a piano, right? What can I do with this? I have a guitar. What can I do this? I have a space. I'm okay if people come into my space, right? So how can I keep costs low or literally zero and do what I want to do without any funding at all? And it sounds scary, but it's not as scary as it seems. And basically, you just want to make sure that you're generating more than you're charging, and you'll be okay. And so what I wanted to give a shout out to is an organization called Akimbo, and I'll put a little note in the chat, akimbo.com. When I was deciding on this program and whether I wanted to go the nonprofit or the for-profit route, I was able to work with them, and they actually offer a bootstrappers workshop every few months. And it was incredibly life-changing, and it helped me understand how to be profitable, how to be, protectable, how to adjust with my industry, right? Those are things that you really need to know to do if you're going to go out on your own without any funding. So I'll put that in the notes, but check out akimbo.com, the Bootstrappers Workshop. So if you do not have any funding and you're going the for-profit way, I have nothing but the best to say about how they have actually helped me launch this course next month.
Thank you for that. I'm sure they'll be getting tons of of Google searches today. Yeah, that sounds incredible. What advice do you all have to give on how to present or how to network with schools or programs, like how to pitch yourself or your program? Any things that artists need, or any like layouts that they should have prepared for these conversations?
I'll jump in. I think for starters, something I'm still learning and is to be yourself, right? When you walk into these meetings or these networking opportunities and you try to be what you think this person would be interested, or who you think this person would be interested in hiring, is usually when you end up missing the mark, right? But when you go and you are actually your whole self and your full self, what happens is people are attracted to that. And that, at least in my experience, leads to generating, opportunities and jobs. So that would be the first thing. Secondly, definitely want to prepare. You want to have visuals ready, video ready, to show what you're talking about. So if you're in a meeting, I usually bring my laptop and I'll pull up a website or something, and that shows just a quick snapshot overview, or, just photographs of this is what I've been doing, or this is what I want to do. That always helps and goes a long way. And yeah, I think that for me, that's a good place to start. Is be yourself and come prepared. Come prepared with something to show that will help give the potential client visual of your program, your vision, and what you have in mind. Because I've walked into plenty of situations where I'd had, didn't have any of that, right? And that didn't go so well. And so, learning over time. And time and practice, that's another thing, is continually put yourself in those positions and in those spaces, so you're able to practice. Not every job is going to come through. Not every opportunity is going to be a yes or a green light. But the more you do it, the more you begin to flex those muscles and grow and learn, right? You know how they say, failure is just kind of an ingredient to success, right? And so show up, man. I used to call, and I still do sometimes. I would just show up at schools and not even have an appointment on the thing. And what I do is I would meet people there, meet the janitor, start talking with the security guard, and just building relationship with people. Oh, the principal's not available today. All right, boom. Yo, here's my card though. Here's a website, boom, boom, boom. Next thing you know, you get a phone call. Oh yeah. And so just kind of building, a relationship with people, slowly establishing rapport is, for me, has been super helpful in generating opportunities.
Love
I was
that.
gonna,
All about
I,
relationships. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna jump in and just reiterate that in a slightly different context of, I remember when I moved to New York City, I was very overwhelmed. I had been working in Baltimore for about 3 years and gone to school there prior to that. So I had some network there, but I just thought, how in the world am I going to make it as a musician, as a teaching artist in New York City? It's so huge. And probably 90% of the things that I have actually ended up doing in the city were opportunities that came to me through networking. So whether it was a friend of a friend, a friend of a friend of a friend, walking in, like Randy said, to a school or to a concert series that I really wanted to play on, and just being like, hey, this is my name, this is what I do, here's my card. I think that's how I've basically been able to get work here in the city. And it's kind of crazy sometimes how, even if someone isn't able to have any influence on the hiring process, just somebody saying, oh, you should apply to this because it aligns with your talents and your interests, gives you a leg up. And then when you apply to the place, you can say, hey, so-and-so told me to apply and said, you guys are great. And whether or not that even influences anything about the hiring process, it's still a very good way to just meet people and network and find out what's available. So that's my experience with.
Yeah, love that. Absolutely. And networking seems to be a huge thread in all of the advice. So, who is it? Issa Rae is like, network across, you never know if your friend is a teacher or your friend knows a teacher, or, all these things. Everybody is connected to someone in some way. So if people know what it is that you're looking to do or what you do really well, you never know who has that connection. So talking about funding, where does the money come in? How can artists generate this like consistent income? Any suggestions or tips on how artists can set up their roster to generate some consistent income?
Yeah, I'll say, kind of a little bit of what Evelyn and Sherry said earlier, which, city and state grants are great, especially if you're doing the nonprofit route. I love what you shared earlier about the bootstrap method, like working with what you have available right now, keeping it low maintenance, low cost, low overhead. All of that is going to help you to generate more income in the long run. And then also, going back to generosity, I'm so glad generosity came up earlier, because I feel like generosity breeds generosity, right? And so, especially, in the beginning, if you don't have like a network or a reputation for what you do, is like being extra generous and sharing what you do broadly is going to turn into leads and opportunities, and provide income, right? Increase and generate income. Even platforms like Patreon, there's other platforms like it, but I use Patreon, and I have people who support there because they love the work I do with young people in art education. So that's one way to have just another stream of revenue. Also, just like building, going back to relationship, it takes time. Also, somebody said that earlier, right? Like things take time. So over time, building a reputation, because what happens is you have repeat clients. So people call us back every year, every semester, every time they get funding from somewhere or they have some extra bread. They're like, hey, can you come by and do a program? Hey, why? Because you took the time on the front end to build relationship, to establish rapport, and eventually a reputation, where you have repeat clients. And all of that takes time, and you just have to be patient and generous and love what you do. Because if you don't love it, then you're not gonna stick it out. So yeah, those have been kind of the keys for me in terms of generating income. Grants on the nonprofit side, the smallest viable audience. I love that. Same thing kind of applies to potential clients and or potential sponsors, or things of that nature. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on income. See that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I also want to point out, since Randy just mentioned again about being patient with time, right? It's just, don't be afraid to work other jobs while you start. I'm going to be the first one to say that, and for people watching from, around the world, if you don't know these places, but you probably, like, I worked at McDonald's while I was doing things. I've worked at Olive Garden, which is a restaurant. I've done it all to keep myself afloat while putting my time and my passion into these other projects. Because sometimes when you're building, right, I'm going to be honest, you don't have that initial income. You have some, but it's not enough. And I think we as artists have to be honest and say, it's okay. It's okay if we have to do these other things while simultaneously doing our art. I think somehow along the way, there's this thing that, like, we as artists have failed, right? We've failed if we're doing these other things. Not at all. We all have to feed our families, okay? So it's perfectly okay. And as far as when you finally get to the place where it's like, okay, I don't need to, oh my gosh, guys, for a time, I was a secretary for Bayer aspirin, your aspirin. I was the secretary for them in Cleveland. Okay, I've literally done it all. You would laugh at my resume. It's hilarious. But I finally got to the place where I was like, okay, I can let go of all of these other things, and I'm making enough as an artist to make it. And then what Randy was saying about, he mentioned Patreon. Obviously, there's literally teaching lessons. There's, doing your art. And I just want to point this out really quick, that make sure whatever you are building, whatever art endeavor you are building, that you pick a market that you want to work with, that you love working with. Pick the people that you want to work with, because guess what? Once you pick that audience, they're yours, right? So really make sure that you are passionate. There's that word again, passionate, and you love that audience, because you're going to be stuck with them for 20, 30, 40 years. That's not a bad thing, but I'm just saying that. And I think if you pick that audience that you are truly passionate about, then once again, it's that circle again, then that consistent income will occur, right? Because you've picked the audience that is right for the generosity that you're giving out to the world.
I love that. And it's almost like, I'm sure your resume is not, it's amazing, because it shows, just what you're willing to do in order to continue to do what you love. And I think that
Right.
also leaves a lot of room to be generous. It's difficult to be generous when, you're looking at your bills and someone's asking for something, but when you have income coming in from elsewhere, you have more space within yourself to give of yourself. So yeah, that's amazing. I feel you.
Yes, I would give a shout out to a friend of mine who this last year during the pandemic, obviously this was hard for artists all over the globe. It's been very difficult, but I just want to highlight what you just said. She just won this major national competition. She crushed it. She was amazing. And she was telling me that over the pandemic, right, the unemployment was enough. And so she was like, I have to make ends meet. And she got into real estate to survive. And that was a scary thing for her. And I remember her saying, like, am I ever going to get back into music? Like, how is this going to work out? And she did this. And then she was telling me that it was this amazing thing that when she got to the competition, she felt this freedom that she had never felt before. And I said, well, tell me about that. And she says, what, she said, because the competition, if you won a lot of money to help your career. But she said, normally I would have been tense. I would have been stressed. Like, I have to win that money to make it. And she said, because I had financial security under me, when I went into the competition, I was just like, here I am. This is me. This is what I have to offer the world. There's that generosity again. Hello, keeps coming back up. She was able to be generous with her gift, and she blew them away because she wasn't in it to survive. She was in it because she loved it. And she has told me she may kind of do a dual career right now because she kind of has learned that she really enjoys it. But either way, even if like me, she would quit it, right? Because she got herself to a certain point. But I just wanted to point out there is some freedom in that when you are trying to generate that income.
Love that. Yes. And shout out to your friend. Congratulations for sure.
Mhm.
So I have one last question before we jump into the Q&A. And that is, what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you first began your teaching journey?
That's a terrific question. I'll give it a shot. Probably if I took some more time, I could think of plenty of things, but perhaps the first would be that I'm not alone in this, right? So prior to going full time into art education and art period, I worked in healthcare, and and so it was a big kind of deal and transition for me to leave. It kind of, now we're going in another direction of what we just talked about, but to leave that the security of that gig. But my wife and I, we just knew it was time. We felt it was time. We took our time. I was there for over 11 years, doing art and everything else simultaneous to that, as you guys just mentioned, right? While teaching, while performing, while recording. And at some point I was just getting burnt out and felt like, what on my plate can I alleviate? And the one thing was that I was like, I could get another gig when I need to get another gig if necessary. So anyway, but when I did that, there was a sense of loneliness. Like I felt like I was alone because I'll be at dinner with the family and everybody's talking about their different professions or what they're doing. I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of doing this thing that's people kind of esteem as risky, as kind of like out there, and like, oh, word, you're like doing art, like teaching kids or whatever. So that aspect, and then even as an artist, trying to find, for me as a teaching the art of emceeing, I just didn't know of too many MCs, particularly that were teaching like the writing aspect of songwriting, of rhymes, hip hop rhymes and hip hop songs and that sort of thing. And there are plenty out there, but I just wasn't familiar at the time. And so I was really like scrambling and trying to put things together. And over time, I began to meet different art educators and be like, oh snap, this is such a gift to kind of see how you do it and learn from you. And so I guess, just to know that I wasn't, that I'm not alone, was probably something I wish I'd have known when I jumped in the deep end.
I love that. I feel like that is a thing to know across all all career paths, is that you're not alone in life in general. So definitely thank you for that. Evelyn, did you have anything that you wish you'd known?
Sure, yeah. And sorry, my internet popped out for a second, so let me know if I'm breaking up at all. But for me, I think it's just like not being scared of the kids and just the idea of teaching. Because when I was being trained as a classical violinist, I swore that I would never teach. And I just was like, I'm not a person who likes kids. I don't really do that kind of thing. I don't know how. Like, I remember in that first project, I was terrified because I had to walk into a public school and I had to help little kids make sure that they got their bathroom break before we did our creative session. And it just like terrified me. But I found that it's really not that scary, and kids especially, but actually almost everyone is really excited about learning in the arts. And when you're there to provide something like that, it'll be so rewarding and you'll get such an amazing response from people. And that helps you to keep going, to remember that, oh, you're actually providing something that people really love and appreciate and have fun with. And so just being able to let go a little bit, have fun, and just remember people that you're trying to reach, they're not scary. They're just people like you, and they're just kids, and they're just your community. And often it'll be way more rewarding than you think.
Love that. Love that. Getting over that fear. Sometimes it doesn't go away, but we can push past it and realize it wasn't that bad. Cherie?
Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to end by saying if I could do things over, I would do a lot different. But one of the biggest things is that I know, hello, all you artists watching, we are kind of taught to be perfect. It's about perfection, perfection, perfection. And when I see how that has hindered me and got in the way of some incredible things that I could have done earlier because I was afraid to put things out there, right? It's that fear again. I have just 3 words for you. Well, 4. Take massive imperfect action. Take massive imperfect action. And with that, fail hard, fail fast, fail often. Because the truth is, like I was saying about building this program after 20 years, it's built up of everything I've learned, which means, hello, everything I've failed at, okay, right? So if you can, we're so afraid to fail, but it's in the failure that we learn. So get it over with, right? The more you fail, the more you're gonna learn, the more you're gonna grow, and the more you're gonna have to give to the world. So don't hesitate, forget perfect, pardon my French, screw perfect, and take massive imperfect action towards what you have to share with the world.
Love that. I feel like these nuggets are for me. I am truly grateful. Oh, this was incredible. Wow. Okay. All right. We're going to jump right into the Q&A. We're going to do a lightning round. Our very first question is how to bridge connections to schools and school administrators to pitch your classes and programs when you have direct contacts. Looks like Evelyn is about to jump in.
I would say for me, a lot of times I've gone through an arts organization, but if you already know an administrator at a school, I mean, basically the principals, like the teacher who might be the closest to the one that like your discipline, whether it's the music teacher or general arts teacher, those are the conversations to have first. And it helps, like Randy was saying earlier, how his wife helped him with those lesson plans and materials. If you walk in there and you have something on paper and a video on your computer that you can show that says, this is what I do, that's going to be a way faster connection than if you walk in there and don't have as much material or are talking to the wrong person. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you for that. Anyone else? No pressure. Have an answer to that? We can jump to the next question. All right. Shout out to Viva for that question. Appreciate you. Next question is, why should more artists go into the teaching industry or go into teaching their artistry?
That's a great question. Well, I think in part because young people deserve an education that includes art, and that isn't always the case for young people, especially in particular neighborhoods. So a big kind of mission, a grand mission that we're on at Thrive Collective is to eradicate artless education. Here in New York City, right, like the art mecca of the world, there are actually schools where kids don't have access to proper art education, whether that be music instruction or visual arts or whatever the case may be. And so, providing that, I think is awesome, is noble, and it's manifold because, like, teaching art helps me to become a better artist and a better person and human, hopefully, in general. Like, young people have so much. That's the other thing. When we're talking a lot about teaching, which is what we do, but really we're experiencing and we're learning simultaneously. So kids have so much to teach us, right? And so I think that if you're interested in it and if you have a sort of a passion and a skill set to do it, I say, go for it, because you're gonna learn a lot from the young people that you work with. It's gonna be like this reciprocal relationship. So I think for me, it's been indispensable, to work with young people. Yeah.
Awesome. Love that. And last question, we're going to go with you, Cherie, and it comes from Leandra. Do you still find room in your schedule to teach privately as well as in the classroom? If so, do you have a preference?
Oh, yes, I actually do. I do one-on-one coaching. Do I have a preference? Actually, I just want to speak to that real quick too. I mentioned earlier, I'm a wife, I'm a mom, and I'm also a homeschool mom, FYI. Balance, great. Life is so balanced. I'm totally kidding. It's a hot mess most days. So with that said, I kind of have this schedule where I only allow myself, right? There's only so many hours in the day. So it's like, okay, I'm only going to devote this much time to teaching privately and this much time to like group and to those kind of generous nonprofit endeavors, because you have to have those boundaries on what you can do in everything. Boy, which one can I be honest and say I like them both equally for just wildly different reasons? You
You sure can.
I mean, yeah, I mean, they're just so different, and I think there's so much to glean from both of them that I genuinely have a hard time citing. I may give it this much of an advantage to group. There's just something about groups, like there's like an energy to it that's really cool. And then you were asking, I apologize, what was the last part of that?
I think that was it. I think it was, do you find time to still have private lessons, and then which do you prefer? So yeah,
Okay,
you
I did
hit
go,
all of
okay.
it. Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. So we have come to the end of the Q&A session and the end of our webinar. I want to thank Cherie, Randy, and Evelyn for your incredible insight and your time and all of the gems that you all were dropping in this session. It was amazing, to say the least. Huge shout out to all of you all who have joined and came in the chat. Love to everybody in there from Seattle. We got Washington. Much love, Jazzo. We got Denver. All over the world, Uganda, LA. I mean, y'all are showing out. Rotterdam. I mean, come on, this is incredible. So I truly, truly appreciate you all. Again, this is In Session, teaching artists how to make an impact and generate income. I am Kristen, aka Like Water, and we will be back for the next In Session on October 14th, covering live audio for indie musicians. So please stay tuned. We are coming back to live shows, and it's great to know how to set up your own sound and the sound that you need for your shows. So again, thank you all so much, incredible panelists. You all were amazing. Thank you for being with us today, and have an amazing day. This is In Session.
Thank you. Peace.
Thank you so much.
This was great.